As you may well know already from your own work, community tensions don't emerge out of nowhere. They are often present in a low form with a low grumble for a long time before anything really erupts that anyone takes any notice of. In our work, sometimes we've referred to this as hidden conflict which isn't really on the table, but which is interrupting the flow of relationship within a given area. Here we're going to think about a timeline, a conflict timeline, which helps you develop a visual idea of what it really looks like, the conflict. It gets them into perspective, and it helps you think back through the history, the context that lies behind some of the actual clashes that you're dealing with. Have a think as you go about what happened to make things escalate, and how long was it going on as an issue before something was really out in the open that could be addressed. This is a conflict timeline, and again, this is drawn from international conflict work. This is a simple version, but it works for everybody. If you can see in the top right-hand corner there, the conflict spiral, which we discussed early on in these sessions. And in fact, this is really, in a way, another way of demonstrating that same way that conflict builds and grows with repeated spirals. So in this slide here, what you can see is some of the conventions with a timeline. You have the time along the bottom, and you have a conflict indicator or scale up the left-hand side. You can see that we've started it with a little bit of a straight line to indicate carrying on from a long grumble. And then as events start happening, especially when there's been a rapid escalation and reached a crisis point, you can see that it tends to drop away a bit. We're going to have a look at in a moment what this looks like in a real case, but what very often happens here is that as it starts to de-escalate, people who've come in to help the situation, agencies or police, etc., support, they fade away. And unless the underlying issues of that conflict have really been addressed, what you almost always find is that the patterns come back, the escalation starts again, and in some cases, very often, it's actually more serious as it goes around that cycle again. Here we have what that same model, the conflict timeline, looks like when you apply it to a case study. We're going back to our case study in the square, in the street. We're thinking about the private house owners, the social housing tenants, and the young people. The escalation after the long grumble about bad feeling around parking was that cars started to become more and more damaged, but also there was a lot more hanging out late at night by young people coming in from outside the area. The rapid escalation was repeated, almost daily calls to the police, dragging in local councillors, getting in touch with the media. And at the point where it became a bit of a crisis for people was when it was very visible. Car owners were getting very aggressive to young people and their parents, and a lot of different agencies arrived with their ideas how to sort this out. One idea was to bring in a mosquito device, recently devised in America, which they put in the square, and its high frequency was thought to be unbearable to young ears and drove people out of the square. At the point where it turned into a crisis, lots of agencies did appear. The police appeared more and more, housing officers were there, community safety came in, and in fact Community Resolve was approached as an agency to think of a better alternative to the mosquito device. That was good, and a good piece of work did go on. Agencies did start to disappear, and there was a long facilitated process with the residents that led to a new idea for the square and how it would be divided up, etc., and some thoughts about bringing people together to do joint events to build relationships. That did go well, the agencies did disappear, and there was a de-escalation. But it's worth noting that even in our example, because of a multi-agency challenge of timescales, so we might have got residents to agree something, but the money that was supposed to come from another source never turned up, bad feeling did restoke itself quite soon after. The situation stayed better, but it didn't really totally go away. And one of the reasons was because it is a challenge trying to do things across multi-agencies.
Using the conflict you've started to work on, draw a timeline. Work on getting the whole picture. Were there rumblings of rumours prior to the escalation? And when the escalation arrived, what did it look like? Were there several goes at trying to sort things out? And what was done to address these issues?
Our last tool in conflict analysis, conflict mapping, also comes from overseas work with international conflict. Here, what we're trying to do is make sure that we can get a whole page picture of what is going on. And there are many different conventions that you can use to do this. They can indicate power, can indicate relationships, you can bring in what sorts of influences that you can't see are having a bearing on the situation, and you can also think about listing and linking issues. On this slide you can see some of the classic conventions for conflict mapping. You've got bad feeling as a zigzag line between two different parties. The circles represent parties and their different sizes, so it can be numbers. A bigger circle is more people. It can also sometimes be power, a bigger circle for the people who have more power in the situation. You can see there one circle with a line through it as a divided group. And in the corner you've got something called shadow or out of sight influences. So that can be the media, or it could be the police, or it can be the bigger context structural stuff that we've been talking about through other models. Take a little time to look at this slide carefully and see the different types of line and connection that we've represented here. Let's apply the idea of conflict mapping to our case study. On the right hand side we have a big group of long-term social housing residents who've been here for many years. And in the centre, at the top there, we have a group of young people. But this is in fact a divided group of young people. It isn't single. We have the local young people, who a lot of them are the children of the social housing tenants. And we also have a group of young people who are passing through the area and using the space. Over on the left-hand side, we have a much smaller group, although in a way much more powerful group, of car and house owners, private owners who've arrived in the area more recently and around whom a lot of the different issues are arising. When you do a conflict map, you do have to remember to include yourself. And at the bottom, we have a circle for Community Resolve, the local agency who was asked to come in. You can see how we've represented the different relationships with jagged lines or straight lines, or in some cases a double line to represent a very strong relationship. And down here in the left-hand corner and up in the right-hand corner, we've given an indication of two possible shadows. The media, who've got a very close relationship with these private owners, but also the police, who are involved with all these different groups in different ways at different times. The thing about all of these tools is that they offer you to use in a way that works for you. Make it your own. We have another example here on this slide of a project actually from Africa, which was looking at the use of toilet blocks in Market Square. This agency were actually mapping the issues rather than the people, and they've used colour to indicate different ways and means of connection. So when you're thinking about drawing up a conflict map, there's no right or wrong. Don't worry about whether it's up to scratch or using the right conventions. Just create a one-page version of it that works for you. And that may well point the way to future thoughts and ideas.
Take a good chunk of time to apply this last exercise. What you'll be doing, hopefully, is to work in pairs as coaches. Your role as a coach is to listen and to ask questions. What you'll focus on is some of the hidden influences. Discuss your findings and then upload your examples.